Hi, everyone. Bob Dietrich here with another edition of the ADHD Toolbox. And we are very excited and honored to have Will Curb with us. Will has got an amazing podcast and really helps people with executive function challenges, helping understand how they are different than people that are neurotypical, how they operate versus people with ADHD. And it's going to be an awesome conversation. I can't wait to hear from Will some of the tips and tactics that he uses to help people with ADHD every day. Will, welcome to our show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, we're excited to have you. And, it's not often that you run across people that have a big podcast. And we know the podcasts are a kind of a buzz that's, a popular thing that's happening, in the 21st century. But when you have podcasts with ADHD, you're helping so many people with their daily lives, and it's just so important. And I know we have a couple people on our program already, Brendan Mahan, Jeff Copper, and people like that, Alan Brown, and to have you on the program as well just helps us spread the word about people like you guys that are really doing some amazing work and helping people with ADHD. So thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you for saying that. And yeah, it's amazing because like ADHD is one of these like few conditions where the more you know about it, the better off you are.
Yeah.
Because I know like for years after I got diagnosed, I still had no clue what some of the conditions or some of the things that went along with ADHD were. And it'd be like, oh, like you'd learn something and you're like, oh, that explains so much.
Right.
Yeah.
And what we found too, working with teachers and children, is that when teachers understand that this is how their brain works and they can't do what you're asking them to do at this point. So it opens up the compassion, and they're able to say, oh, I didn't know. I thought they could do it and they're just being resistant or defiant or whatever. And it's like, no, it's not defiance. This is not defiance. This is something deeper than that. And when they understand that, it's a beautiful thing because they have more compassion. So tell us about your journey. We'd love to hear about how you got involved in ADHD, and then about your podcast. And then we'll talk about some executive function tips and tools that you've been working that'll work for you and your listeners. So how'd you get started with ADHD? What's your experience?
Well, I was diagnosed when I was 26, and only reason I know that off the top of my head is because I wrote about it recently. Otherwise, that would be completely. It's like I got diagnosed sometimes in my 20s, but it was after my brother was diagnosed and both my sisters were diagnosed, and I was like, perhaps I should look into this. And I remember going into the talking with because I saw a psychologist and talked to them, and they were like, well, do you think you have ADHD? And I was just like, I just always assumed this is how everybody thought.
Mm-hmm.
And it just like floored me for a while to be like, maybe my brain's a little bit different. And so I got my diagnosis, and then I did absolutely nothing with it for a few years.
Mm-hmm.
I just kind of was like, okay, I have this diagnosis. I'm going to take some medication, and that's going to solve everything. And medication absolutely helped, but it really didn't solve a lot of the executive function problems I had. And so eventually I was just texting with a friend, and I was like, man, I'm just feeling so lazy. I don't get anything done. And then I was like, well, that's not fair. It's probably really the ADHD. And then that just like clicked me to be like, oh, I should try and do something about that. So then I started doing some research online. I started listening to a bunch of podcasts. I really followed Eric Tivers on the ADHD Rewired podcast for a while.
Yep, Eric's
yeah, and then I took his coaching and accountability courses or groups, and then that just completely opened my eyes to how different my brain works and how I can actually like leverage some of my ADHD stuff to get stuff done rather than just being frustrated and trying to do everything and just not getting anything done.
Right. Yeah. And so you sought it out, which is great. I mean, a lot of people don't seek it out, or maybe they just accept the doctor's diagnosis and take some medicine, and you just kind of, you sought it out and you went for it.
Yeah, well, and it took me years to realize that it was something I could seek out, because it was just, oh yeah, like there's so much information in the media about what ADHD is, which is just mostly wrong.
Hmm.
And so then you're goes like, oh, okay, I just get distracted. But that's such a small piece of ADHD that it feels like such a disservice to people that that's the message of what they think they have.
Yeah. Isn't it interesting? And I noticed you
Yeah,
have something in your hands, right? And
yeah, I got
so
the
you're and that helps you think, right? And
yeah,
neurotypical people don't understand that this is helping you focus and be able to give a killer podcast here. And I'm sitting here fiddling with the papers on my desk. I'm doing the same thing. I could easily be playing solitaire and be totally engaged in this. And neurotypical people don't understand that.
yeah. My brother absolutely loves knitting, and he knits all the time,
Hmm.
and it's just that's his fidget, where
Yeah,
he's just
yeah,
constantly, and it's for neurotypical people, it's distracting that he's knitting. It's like, you're not paying attention to what we're doing. But for him, it's like, this is how I'm engaging in everything, because I can focus on everything so much more if I have something that's like just keeping me so that I have to stay engaged. So I can't let like this kind of, prevents my brain from wandering off and doing something else.
yeah, yeah. I was talking to Laura Poirier. She's the Facebook mama or the ADHD mama on Facebook,
Hmm.
and and she was talking about how when she's at work, she'll just lay on the floor on her back with the ball, and she'll just throw it up and catch it and throw it up and catch it while she's in a meeting, in a corporate environment, because this is part of how she thinks and engages. And so everybody's different. That's one thing we're learning in this toolbox. Everybody's different. Everybody has their own thing, but there are some things that we can do, which you're going to share with us a little bit, that can help improve the executive function. So that's cool
Yeah,
stuff.
absolutely.
So tell us about your podcast. How did you evolve into starting your podcast, and then we'll go into where it's at now. But how did you start the podcast? What happened there?
So I, for a while, had been like, uh, I've always really enjoyed writing, and it's been something uh, that I've all sorts of writing, not just, so I like write a lot, try to write fiction and a lot of nonfiction stuff, like figuring out ways that I can better myself. So I'm looking into like general self-help stuff, and I'd be like, okay, I've read so much about this, I can like work on it. So I started writing more about that, but it was just didn't feel like it was going anywhere. And then I'd be like frustrated, like I'm also writing about stuff that I don't feel is like really working for me. Uh, and so I kind of like let that drop off. Uh, and then I was doing a mastermind session from the uh, ADHD Rewired coaching and accountability groups. And I was like, I think I want to start this up again, but as uh, with a focus on ADHD, because I've learned so much about that, and I can morph that together with this other writing I've done before. So
Hmm.
I have all these ideas that I can like link together. Uh, so used my momentum from that to start the podcast,
Hmm.
and I was like, I also want to figure out how I can. It's so hard to get so much information out from ADHD, because I'll be like, okay, let's read about this, and I'm like, oh no, this article is way too long for me to stay focused on. Uh,
I know, right?
as yeah, like the funny things I see on like the like ADHD forums. It's like we have a tendency to both ramble and not be able to read what someone else is rambling to us about. Uh, and
Hmm.
so I was like, well, how would I want this information presented to me? And so I was like, oh, if I create this like short form podcast that I can listen to, that would be like 10 to 15 minutes at the most. I've got some episodes that are up to like 18 minutes, but it's not here or there. And so it's just, I will write about an idea and
Hmm.
love doing this, because it's also like so much like I learned so much writing. I'm like, okay, here's my idea about what this is. And then I'm writing them like, oh no, it's actually about this.
Mm-hmm.
And so that just created this podcast, this great short form episodes. They're short. It's been way more popular than I thought it would be starting off. So been really excited with the reception it's gotten so far.
That's fantastic. And what a great idea too. And that's the brilliant mind of the ADHD are, coming up with solutions for other ADHDers, right? Which is the short form. What a great idea. I wish I would have thought about it. And we're already past the 15-minute mark, almost from our standpoint.
Yeah.
So awesome. That's fantastic. And now your podcast has grown. How many listeners do you have now?
It's about 3,000. I just last week passed 50,000 downloads, and I started last October, so it's been just explosive growth for something that I was like, because years before I had another podcast that I ran, and I'm like, just like, whoa, this is within 10 times the numbers of the last podcast I ran. So,
wow, that's awesome. That's awesome. Congratulations, you deserve that. And
thank you.
and this is amazing, work that you're doing to help our community to get the answers to their challenges, so they can rise above and hit that brilliant part and access that brilliant part of themselves, like you are. So great job. So in your podcast, you talk a lot about executive function stuff, and how to be more organized. Why don't we start by defining what does the executive function mean really, and then we'll start to go into some of the tips.
Yeah. Well, executive function is actually one of those really tricky things to define, because I've tried to write about this before and be like, okay, let's get a really concise. And it comes down to just like all these little things that you do that are the like first part of an action, like, okay, I'm going to sit down and work, and then doing the actual work part rather than opening up social media, or time management. So like time management, definitely a huge part of like understanding a clock, understanding that you have to set limits on how long you're working, because stopping is also an executive function, which is, kind of why we go into hyperfocus. So it's a little bit of elusive definition. I'm sure I have a written down one that's much nicer, but
it sounds like managing your life. It's like these are the processes that you put in place to manage your life. And once you
absolutely
processes, habits, then you can actually, you can start to get more done, and be more.
I mean, basically like the command processor of your brains, like
yeah,
things that say do this, and then you actually do that thing, rather than when you're stuck on the couch and you're like, I need to get up and do something, and then you just keep sitting on the couch being like, I can't will myself to move.
All right, well, that could be the name of this podcast, but will yourself to move. Because your name's Will. Just so our viewers can make that connection. So let's talk about some of the tips that you have, because I'm dying to hear some of the things that work for you and your viewers or your listeners.
Yeah. So one of the things I've really learned through the podcast is how interconnected all these ideas are. Mm-hmm. And one of the most important ones is just working on your sense of time. Mm-hmm. And so there's time blindness can really come in two forms, and I find that it's easy to kind of hit both ends of it, where you either think something takes much less time than it actually takes, or something takes way more time than it should take. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of people that are like, okay, I'm going to, do this project. It should take me 2 hours. And then 4 hours later, they're like, I'm not even close to being done. And they're like, how could I have not done this right? Or they're like, okay, I need to fill the dishwasher, but that's going to take an hour, so I'm not going to do that. Mm-hmm.
Right. And it doesn't take an hour. It takes 15 minutes or something.
And so,
or 5.
A real important part about that is getting a timer and just timing yourself with these things so that you actually know how long they take. Like, so I'll have like a sheet that I fill out where it's just like, okay, check out this okay, this is the thing I want to do. Here's how long I think it's going to take. Time it, and then actually uh, look like, okay, what was the difference? Did I write this email in an hour? Did I write this email
Hmm.
in 5 minutes?
Hmm.
Because an email is definitely one of the things I have executive function struggles with, where I'm like, okay, I'll respond to this after I do this other thing. But um, so time management is definitely one of those starting things, because then once you start figuring out how long your day is, you can start figuring out what you can actually fit in your day. Because I was definitely in the category of creating a to-do, just a straight to-do list, and being like, I'm going to do these 10 things today, hitting 3 of them, and then feeling terrible about myself.
Hmm.
Because I'm like, why couldn't I do more of the stuff? I was just slacking off all day. Even if I worked really hard, I still felt like I wasn't doing enough. And then once I was able to like start realizing how long stuff took, scheduling into my day and being like, oh, there is not enough time in my day to do all of those things realistically. So I'm just going to have to cut back. Like I have to accept that reality. I can't change some of those things. So that first step of like figuring out how long things take and then accepting that you can only do so much was a big step.
Right.
Um, and then along with that is figuring out,
Well,
lost my train of thought.
before you get into that, do you
Yep.
mind me asking about or making a comment here? Because I was just in an entrepreneur training, which I do a lot. I mean, that's my
Mhm.
jam is entrepreneurship. And one of the things I've noticed is that they have a little schedule about time management that they use, similar to what you were describing, right? And
Mhm.
they're talking about, because entrepreneurs, it's not so much that they can't track time, it's that they need to be efficient with their time, and they need to delegate. They can't be a lone wolf, a lone ranger, so to speak. They
Yeah.
have to be able to delegate and work in teams. And so by tracking your time, you can figure out where that goes. And also when you look at the entrepreneurship world, and people are ADHD world, and look at people with ADHD, a large percentage of them become entrepreneurs. And so it seems that like this time tracking, you're absolutely right, is one of the big areas of focus that you'll need to pay attention to with regard to executive function, and becoming more efficient. If you, especially if you want to access that brilliant part of yourself and start to become an entrepreneur, become somebody who creates their own thing, you have to get time management down. And so having these strategies like you were talking about, I think is just brilliant, and a great place to start. I think you're exactly right. Number one place to start.
Yeah. And then you can go into like prioritization, because that's so hard for like being like,
Yeah.
what, like, it doesn't matter if you can do 5 things, but they were the 5 things that didn't need to happen,
Right.
which
Right.
definitely happened to me when I was like starting the podcast. I'm like, I really need to design my website. And then like when I finished, I was like, that really actually didn't need to happen. Like I could have launched with almost nothing and it would have been fine. But
Yeah.
in my head, it was like,
And I'll say that's not just an entrepreneur, or not just an ADHD thing. That's everybody goes through that.
yeah,
You know what I mean? It's like everybody
oh,
gets their priorities mixed up, and the next
yeah,
thing they know, it's like, I didn't need any of this stuff to start my business.
yeah. I mean, one of the things I've definitely discovered with the podcast is that a lot of these things neurotypicals struggle with too. They just might not have it to this. Like, I was like, oh, because like, it makes me go, oh, is everybody ADHD? And I'm like, oh no, it's they have some of these struggles. I have these struggles all the time.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Like, okay, like how like prioritizing what I want to do for my bedtime routine, or prioritizing how I'm going to get my kids out the door in the morning, like figuring out, okay, what's actually going to make a difference in the morning, and going through things like, okay, if I what's the smallest thing I can do that's going to make a noticeable difference to the next task I need to do.
Hmm.
Uh, so I kind of try and look at it in terms of dominoes. Like, how can I like hit one thing and make it keep going? Uh, so and it doesn't have to be a big thing. It can just be like getting out the door with my daughter in the morning to go to school, be like doing those reminders, like, okay, hey, we're going to leave in 15 minutes. We're going to leave in 5 minutes. Okay, it's time to put our shoes on. If I don't do those earlier reminders, uh, it's going to be much harder to get her out the door.
Yeah.
I can mention that she was also recently diagnosed with ADHD, so it's definitely
Not a big surprise, right? I mean,
yeah.
it really runs in the family. It really is a genetic thing. So, but the good news is that she's got that brilliant part of herself that she gets access to, and
Hmm.
just like the rest of us. So, so great. So prioritization is a big deal as well. So number 2, prioritization. Write that down if you're watching this. And so, what are some of the things that you do to prioritize that would be a good tip for us to understand?
So it's definitely first that is like figuring out what dominoes um I can knock down, figuring out, because you also with prioritization, we making sure that I'm not just falling into doing things that are urgent is a big deal.
Right, right. Because then you
Because
put fires out all day, right?
yeah, and it's ADHD just thrives on that urgent energy, because like one of our strengths is definitely deal it being the person doing stuff in a crisis, because we can just be like, okay, I'm doing this and I'm doing this
Right,
and I'm doing
right,
this,
right,
and we do so well there.
right.
But then it means we don't get to do a lot of the stuff we really want to do, because we're just always dealing with the urgent things. And so figuring out, okay, if I want to do something important, how do I carve time out in my schedule to also do that? So I will like schedule things that I'm like, okay, this is time that I'm going to spend for things I want to do, but for whatever reason aren't urgent.
Yep, that's a great idea. And you know what? I've heard that before, and I don't do it. I need to do that myself. That's a
Yeah.
really good one.
Yeah. I mean, I say I do it a lot, but I do it occasionally. I wish it's like what I should do that more.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. A great idea. Great reminder. Thank you for that.
yeah. And then also like breaking bigger projects down into the more component parts, and
Mhm.
then seeing how those components will fall together, being like, okay,
Mm,
what, what's going to make the next step easier? Uh, where do I need to like, are there parts that I can't do if I don't do another part first?
right,
Um,
right,
so like recording podcasts, I have to write a script first. If I don't have a script, I can't record.
right,
So I can't even schedule a recording before I have the script written.
right, right, right. Yeah, and by the way, if you're watching this video, we don't have a script for this one. Don't tell Will. Okay.
Yeah.
So, so yeah, and these are good awarenesses. You can't do a script, or you can't do a podcast without a script, so you have to do that. And so, getting these dominoes in play, or understanding the steps involved, and saying which steps can I do that don't require me to get that I can do separately without having other things done first, or that might actually knock down the other things, might start to get the other things in order. And so
Hmm.
prioritizing those, that's great. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I did want to share one of the things that I do is understanding body chemistry and understanding brain chemistry,
Hmm.
to the little degree that I do. I understand that dopamine, you get dopamine hits, which is the chemical that motivates you. You get dopamine hits when you complete tasks, right?
Hmm.
So understanding that, it doesn't matter how big the task is. I mean, you get a bigger hit with a bigger task, but even small tasks, you get dopamine hits. That's why people cross things off their list, right? They're going, yeah, and they're feeling good about themselves. And so if you want to motivate yourself to start getting momentum in your tasks, you can start with the smaller tasks, the easier ones. And you do 2
Yeah.
or 3 fast tasks that are easy to do, you start to gain momentum. And then the next task that's a little harder, you got the momentum to do it. You got the excitement.
Yeah. I mean, I love doing that for episodes that I'm writing, because I'll be like, okay, if I just try and sit down and write a script, it's too intimidating for me to get started there.
Right.
Uh, so I have like this little sheet I have that I just have called pre-write. It's like, okay,
Mhm.
what's the episode title? What's it going to be about? What are some ideas? What are some quotes that support these ideas? Well, like what, and so I can just like kind of like start writing in that, and then it's like, oh, okay, and then half an hour later, I have the sheet filled out that can like let me write an entire episode 10 times faster.
I love it. What a great system that you have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because definitely when I started, I'd be like, right. And then I'd be like, I need to completely rewrite this because I've had some ideas here that I want to implement, but I can no longer implement in a 15-minute thing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fantastic. So time prioritization, which prioritization seems like it's also a strategy to overcome procrastination, right?
Hmm.
Well, because you're getting yourself motivated. What would you say another big a big tip is for
Uh,
executive function?
uh, Kind of actually outsourcing it with accountability.
Yeah.
Um, I have a accountability team I work with, and I kind of like talk about meet with them once a week on Zoom calls like this,
Hmm.
and we just like talk about, hey, like what are we trying to work on throughout the week, uh, and just telling people that I'm going to do something increases the chances of me doing that thing by so much.
Right.
Uh,
They hold you accountable.
yeah, and it's just like fantastic. Like, we had this meeting uh, last week, and it was just like great because so I was like, okay, when like they needed to do this thing for taxes, and so it's like, okay, when are you gonna do that? Like, I'll do this. Then it's like, but when? And they're like, okay, I'll do this. No, but actually, when are you going to do it? And it like took three levels in to actually get the answer there, and the person's like, really, thank you for like pushing me on that because I was really trying to weasel my way out.
Yeah,
And
that's
then
all.
they're like, hour later, they like texted us like, yeah, I finished that, and it's just like awesome. We can actually do things when we kind of work together, which is I think another great thing is just building ADHD community. Talking with other people with ADHD is a great thing too, just because understanding your brain,
Hmm.
seeing that mirror of like, oh, you're doing this crazy thing too. It's not actually crazy. This is just how my brain works.
Yeah, yeah, fantastic. I mean, yeah, and not to overwhelm our audience, I think we're going to leave it with these three because we're just about out of
Okay.
time. But what a great start to a list, and I'm sure you've got more on your website. Where can people find you if they want to find more information?
The website is hackingYourADHD.com.
Hmm.
And then you can find me on social media on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, both with all with the handle Hacking Your ADHD.
Hmm.
So I was fortunate enough to get that. Or you can just email me directly at william@hackingYourADHD.com.
Perfect. And remember what we talked about today was time management, making sure that you've got your time management skills in, booking that time so you can get motivated. So important to making sure that you get things done. Also, procrastination and prioritization. So prioritization will help you overcome the procrastination. And then the third thing you talked about slips my
So
mind.
accountability.
Accountability, of course,
See, it worked.
because I don't use that and I need to, and that's why I didn't remember. So and accountability is definitely key. I do use it in some areas of my life, but I don't use it enough, and when I do use it, things work. And it's amazing. So awesome. I love those tips. And again, if you want to find more about Will Curb and understand his processes and get more information, join his podcast. Go to hackingyouradhd.com and you'll find him there.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Well,
Yes. You have
yeah. And
any
thank you.
last words for our audience before we sign off here?
Yeah, definitely check out the podcast if you'd liked what you heard. You can find it on just search Hacking Your ADHD on all major podcast platforms. So I should have said that earlier. That's actually the easiest way to do anything. But yeah, and uh, really, I love doing this because it's so cool to see all the different ways you can work with your ADHD, which
Mhm.
just makes it so much easier to like do everything in your life. It's exhausting trying to pretend to be neurotypical. So embrace ADHD, and that makes it so much easier to get through life.
And what a great message that is, because there's so many reasons to embrace ADHD. Not only is there a brilliant side at the on the other side, but if you don't get it managed, you're really in the struggle. And people who don't manage it, the mortality rates are not good.
Yeah.
So make sure that you do whatever you can to manage it. We're here to help you. So visit Will at hackingYourADHD.com. Will, thank you so much for being on the program. I really appreciate it.
And thank you for having me. It was
Yeah.
a pleasure.
Yeah, pleasure's ours. Thank you all for watching this episode of the ADHD Toolbox. We will see you on the next episode.